The Great Devourer, an immeasurably colossal threat from beyond our galaxy whose sole purpose is to find and consume all life. These are the Tyranids, and all of the factions marking their territory in Warhammer 40,000. They are positively the most important existential threat to existence. Like a swarm of locusts, the many hive fleets descend on system after system, devouring every scrap of biomass before moving on. In the smaller scale, the many bioforms that make up these fleets and their splinters are equally terrifying. Huge monsters with clacking armor plates, chattering teeth, and razor-sharp spines. It's no wonder that they capture our imagination so well. So it is time for us to begin taking a closer look at some of the other players on the 40k stage, and with Tyranids being so clearly on our minds lately for some reason, we thought it was only right that we started with this introduction to the Hive Mind's children. Before we start, let's lay some ground rules. First, we won't be specifically covering special named creatures like Old One-Eye. We will also do our best to only discuss creatures that have or have had Games Workshop models, with one exception. Watch till the end of the episode if you want to find out which. And finally, no hive ships. We'll save those for a later fleet episode if you like that idea. So with those parameters settled, let's spray ourselves with some pheromones that this Mechanicus guy assured me would keep us safe, and take a closer look at the Tyranid bioforms. Although they are normally thought of as ordnance, even a humble mine is a living creature in a Tyranid swarm. The Spore Mine is a roughly spherical creature with dangling tendrils. It has no eyes or any visible organs used for detecting prey, but it still manages to maneuver serenely across a battlefield without much difficulty. The secret is an array of feelers across the skin of a mine that allows it to detect nearby non-Tyranid organisms. While both blind and slow-moving, the Spore Mine is a significant hazard for infantry and vehicles alike, thanks to an inflated gas bladder, which allows the mine to float like a balloon. And payloads can vary. Typically, they explode with a force comparable to a standard Imperial frag grenade. Clouds of poison gas and thick globs of acid have also been spotted being delivered by Spore Mines. Clusters of these creatures are dropped from hive fleet organisms in low orbit or from larger bioforms on the ground, such as Biovores or Harpies. Once deployed, the mines float calmly in the direction of enemies or mill around in one spot for area denial purposes. Some Spore Mines have drifted for months or even years before finding a target. Others have even been seen speeding through the sky and operating as anti-air support, or have grown so large that they deploy smaller mines on their own. So the Spore Mine might not be the most voracious predator in the Tyranid lineup, but a cluster can easily disable vehicles or end the careers of entire squads, so ignore them at your own peril. Rippers are the smallest of a hive's organisms, usually not much bigger than a pug, but they are by far the most numerous. Their beetle-like carapace hides many legs and rows of teeth, the organism itself forming this sort of biological Roomba whose whole purpose is to break down biomatter and deliver it back to the digestion pits of a hive. To compensate for their small size and weak armor, Rippers tend to attack in groups that number in the hundreds or thousands, forming a living carpet of teeth. If that weren't bad enough, Rippers can sometimes grow wings as an adaptation to dangerous terrain. The living carpet becomes a living curtain of sky slashers that descend on defenders and devour them before moving on. There's even a rarer version of the Ripper called a cortex leech that latches onto a victim's face and inserts feelers into the eyes, nose, ears, and mouth, turning them into a sort of alien zombie. Rippers are sort of the cleanup crew of a hive swarm, and they have such simple minds that without a synaptic link nearby, they either die en masse like mayflies or burrow underground and pupate into higher life forms, even a hive tyrant. Gaunts are the Tyranid bioform. If anyone ever brings up the hive in conversation, most people who are familiar will instantly think of these little raptor-looking organisms. Well, them or warriors, but we'll get to those in a minute. Gaunts come in the widest range of variations of any Tyranid phenotype, and are usually marked by the type of weapon biomorph they are born with. The most common of these by far is the Termagant, a bipedal creature covered in light chitin armor plates and normally armed with a flesh-borer beetle launcher, as well as a pair of smaller bladed arms, but those are only dangerous at close range. Almost every Gaunt type looks the same, but with a different weapon replacing the flesh-borer. Scything Talons makes it a close-ranged Hormagaunt, Spine Fists make it a skirmishing Spine Gaunt, and so on. Variations only start getting really noticeable with brood types like the gargoyle, which has a pair of wings, or the neurogaunt that typically swarms around larger synapse creatures, acting as both protection and amplification nodes for their synaptic influence over the swarm. There's even a version that bonds with a parasitic barb launcher organism, providing artillery support much closer to the front lines than the larger Tyranid fire support creatures typically gather. Gaunts are the backbone of any swarm and often number in the thousands for any given engagement. They are still some of the more simple creatures, and without a synapse creature nearby to give direction, most Gaunts will flee and hide. This benefits Hormogaunts specifically, which are reportedly able to reproduce independently of a hive, allowing for dangerously large Tyranid infestations to crop up if they aren't hunted down quickly. Part shock troop, part scout, the Genestealer is such an iconic and independent organism that for a long time the Imperium wasn't even aware that they were Tyranids. Even though their physiology forces them into a perpetual crouch, Genestealers are typically as tall as the average human. Light armor plating saves them from most regular forms of damage, but their forearms and powerful jaws allow them to tear even the toughest armor to shreds, a fact learned at great cost to Space Marine boarding parties, even while wearing near impenetrable Terminator armor. Genestealers are also lightning fast and capable of surviving even hard vacuum, or living for centuries if left alone, and their sense of smell is reportedly extremely sensitive, which makes for an amazing scout. These adaptations are certainly enough to make these creatures a significant threat, but the real danger of the Genestealer comes from its intelligence, and its job in the hierarchy of the swarm. Genestealers have a large bulbous head that houses a very adaptive brain, allowing for independent thought and complex problem solving. This is because Genestealers range far ahead of a hive fleet, sowing discord and weakening targets while growing a sizable army of their own. This is done by reproducing in a manner that is probably making Ridley Scott give GW some serious side-eye. Genestealers get their name by their main function, implanting eggs into a host to begin growing hybrid offspring, adding their genetics into the hive, and gaining an army in the process. This is all controlled by a broodlord, a leader organism that evolves to control a Genestealer colony and is the focus of its own miniature hive mind. This allows the broodlord to both control their new hive of hybrid warriors and acts like a beacon to the hive fleet. The final stage of any successful Genestealer colony's life is getting reabsorbed into the biomass of the hive as it consumes the target planet. The fleet then begins gestating new pure strain Genestealers, sending them out to find new planets and starting the process all over again. The Lictor is a hive's response to the need for an assassin. When it begins closing in on a planet, it will produce these creatures in an effort to kill powerful leaders, weakening any resistance even further. Lictors achieve this primarily through stealth, their chameleonic skin allowing them to shift colors and patterns of their hides to match their surroundings perfectly. These big creatures appear to be a specialist mutation of the warrior bioform, with a large upright stance, a pair of scything talons, delicate hands for manipulating objects, and specially adapted organs like flesh hooks and feeder tendrils, which allow a lictor to consume a victim's brain and learn valuable information in the process. Despite being larger than even a space marine, lictors are some of the most agile and quick creatures in a hive, and prefer to strike and fade rather than commit to a longer conflict. This allows for maximum disruption, but also allows the lictor to lace an area with powerful pheromones that will lead the main swarm directly to an enemy too strong for a lictor to destroy on its own. These creatures invariably end up being some of the most mythologized and recognizable beasts in a swarm, if only because of their obvious intelligence and the terror they sow amongst an enemy force. Several specific creatures have been named by defenders as they are seen making calculated strikes into command bunkers or hab blocks to kill leaders, or simply to sow terror. And like other Tyranids, lictors are known to have a very adaptable physiology, changing in response to enemy threats with each new generation. Recent reports indicate that some lictors are now being born with advanced psychic organs, emitting a wave of dread ahead of them to more effectively drain morale. These neurolictors can even use their psychic abilities to hide themselves from detection, as if the shifting skin wasn't good enough. Raveners are the first creatures in this list that do not show much variation or physical adaptations like other Tyranids do. Perhaps it's because they are so specialized in their roles that they haven't faced a particular challenge that required change to overcome, because they are certainly very effective. Raveners are hunting organisms, ambush and assault predators designed to outflank and destroy vulnerable elements of an opposing force. But instead of speeding over the ground or through the air, Raveners burrow below ground. 3 sets of arms tipped with shovel-like scything talons and long snake-like bodies let Raveners quickly undermine their enemies, using sensitive auditory organs to hear the passing of feet above them and specialized eyes that allow them to see the energy emitted by Vox transmissions and stealth technologies. Once located, a Ravener brood will surface explosively and single-mindedly chase down its prey, covering all types of terrain without difficulty. This happens even more without the presence of a synapse creature to guide them, as the base instinct of the simple Ravener organism is to hunt down and destroy any nearby living creatures, making them almost more dangerous when cut off from their hive mind. Like we said earlier, Raveners aren't often found with different adaptations, but they are sometimes found armed with thorax-mounted ranged biomorphs, making them better suited for skirmishing and harassing the flanks of an enemy force while the main swarm closes in for the kill. Remember earlier when we said that Gaunts are what most people think of when Tyranids are mentioned? Well, we lied just a little bit, because the warriors are just as, if not more, iconic. Standing taller than an Astartes warrior and able to make use of almost every weapon biomorph ever seen in the Tyranid arsenal, the warrior is the quintessential swarm beast. Hefty armor plates and a distributed nervous system allow the warrior to shrug off all but the most horrific damage, and indeed, sometimes they can even keep fighting while seemingly dead. The only thing that stops them from unseating the Gaunt as the most recognized Tyranid bioform is their relative rarity, and that's entirely due to their complexity as organisms. Versatility and survivability aside, warriors are extremely valuable to a swarm for one reason: they are synapse creatures. They act as relays, transmitters for the hive mind. Where a warrior brood goes, the swarm reacts and flows like a perfectly drilled army, transforming from a horde of beasts to a sinister intelligent force. Warrior mutations also go beyond their ability to incorporate a variety of weapon biomorphs too, adapting wings to become deadly shrikes or acting as the genetic template used by lictors and raveners. On rare occasions, a warrior will even be elevated to a Tyranid prime, a creature that has all the strengths of a warrior plus increased intelligence and the ability to truly control the swarm while a tyrant isn't available. When facing a Tyranid army, it's always best to take out the warriors first, as they are the literal heart of any swarm. Going the other direction completely, we have the Zoanthrope, a hovering worm-like creature with a bloated brain and atrophied body. It's clear even at a glance that the purpose of this monster is not direct combat. Physically, there's not much threat to a Zoanthrope, but this organism makes up for that by being not just a synaptic booster, but a living psychic battery. The power of these creatures should never be underestimated, but the ability to both protect themselves with sturdy barriers of psychic energy and launch intense mental attacks that have been reportedly able to do everything from boiling adamantium armor to destroying Titan war machines. All of this power comes at a cost, however, as frequent observations have noted that the Zoanthrope has a tendency to burn out during battles in a very similar manner to untrained human psychers suffering from the perils of the warp. Regardless of this weakness, it appears as though a hive values the force multiplier that a Zoanthrope represents, and they are often spotted being held in reserve and protected by other bioforms until they can be safely used. Adaptations for this bioform are rare, but the consumption of highly psychic species like Eldari have created at least one evolved version of the Zoanthrope, typically referred to as the Neurothrope. This creature is a far more stable version and can leech the life force from their victims for use in stabilizing and healing the Zoanthropes that usually cluster around it, making the whole battery of creatures more durable. There is a similar creature that shares some physical traits, causing Imperial observers to give a similar designation. These are the Venomthropes, organisms who float across the battlefield using gas bladders more similarly to the Spore Mine than the psychic levitation of the Zoanthrope. The Venomthrope is equipped with powerful tentacles dripping with dangerous poisons for defense, and they emit a toxic spore-based gas whose whole purpose is to begin the digestion of a planet's life forms, soil, and even atmosphere. It's clear that the Venomthrope has some root similarities to the Zoanthrope and could perhaps be mutated from it, but there's otherwise very little connection between these creatures. Biovores are where we start getting into examples of creatures that can truly be said to be living weapons. Lumbering and heavily armored, every aspect of the Biovore is tailored to operate a gigantic cannon on its back. The creature has seen several versions over the millennia, but they have all been centered around use as a long-range artillery emplacement. The principal ammunition used by a Biovore are the spore mines they grow in their bodies. This is hurled over huge distances using a series of bladders, sending clusters of dangerous mines to close off whole areas of a battlefield. Because of this, Biovores are rarely seen close to the front lines, but there have been specific mutations of this creature that see much closer use, such as the Pyrovore. Filled with corrosive and high reactive acids, the Pyrovore is often spotted close to the fighting, consuming fallen enemies, allies, even metal and rocks to fuel the Flamespurt cannon on its back. The Pyrovore is actually so driven to eat and provide material that this cannon has its own brain that shoots fireballs at targets completely independently and oblivious the Pyrovore it rides on. And if an enemy closes in and manages to kill the beast, the acids inside escape in a pressurized explosion that burns and melts anything nearby. Every hive has its guardians, and Tyranids are no exception. Hive guards are creatures purpose-built for defense, incorporating heavy armor plates and thick, sturdy legs to support massive impaler cannons, which shoot semi-intelligent bone shards that can be longer than a fully grown human is tall and have been seen passing straight through the armor of Imperial battle tanks. These territorial brutes patrol around structures like spore chimneys and capillary towers that a hive fleet uses to digest biomass, acting like soldier ants when one of these constructions comes under attack. To help them in this role, the gestation period of hive guard organisms is incredibly fast, and the larva can reportedly be kept at its end stage indefinitely for fast deployment should a hive need more. In a similar fashion, the Tyrant Guard is a creature tailor-made to guard more valuable synapse creatures who lead swarms. In comparison to even the Hive Guard, Tyrant Guards seem crude, with simple brains unable to feel much pain and no eyes to avoid a vulnerable opening. Tyrant Guards are almost indestructible, but only really good for sacrificing themselves in defense of other bioforms, and so don't see a lot of widespread use. It's interesting to note, however, that while the Tyrant Guard has a lot of similarities to the simpler Gaunts, it incorporates a fused ribcage and a subdermal organ very similar to the black carapace implanted in Astartes warriors, leading some clearly heretical researchers to suggest that these creatures have been developed by absorbing space marine biomass into the hive. A Tyrant is the primary general of a Tyranid force. Towering over most creatures on the battlefield, they are totally self-aware, terrifyingly intelligent, and able to adapt to almost any situation imaginable. Typically standing over 6 meters tall, a Hive Tyrant is armed with a huge array of weaponry, and it wouldn't be wrong to simply describe them as highly evolved warriors. They can sport tank-killing cannons, scything talons bigger than a space marine, lash whips, bones whirled wings, acidic blood, and even birthing organs that can produce huge numbers of rippers. The level of individuality displayed by Tyrants has led many Imperial scholars to believe them to be some sort of consort organism to the Norn queens that form the ultimate rulers of each hive fleet. In this way, they can operate with deadly efficiency and tactical genius without representing a dangerous loss to the mental capacity of the hive mind should they fall in battle. There is a different Tyrant bioform called the Neurotyrant that seems to serve a similar purpose, although it's clear that this creature is based on a different genetic template. Flanked by drifting neuraloids that amplify its power, the Neurotyrant is clearly a more evolved Neurothrope. Its immense psychic might married to the deadly intelligence displayed by other Tyrants to form a creature whose mastery over the hive mind's shadow in the warp allows it to turn an enemy psyker's mind into soup while perfectly controlling enormous swarms of Tyranids. Many of the other organisms in this list are larger or more physically dangerous than the Tyrant, but none represent the clear alien intelligence of the Tyranid hive mind in such a clear way. Facing a Tyrant in battle is the same as confronting a Space Marine captain, Eldari Otark, or the most cunning of Orc war bosses. If warriors are a swarm's heavy infantry and raveners are its cavalry, then the Carnifex is its battle tank. Dwarfing even Tyrants with its sheer bulk, Carnifexes are heavily armored, durable killing machines that excel in pure carnage. They are also just as versatile as their smaller warrior cousins, equipping a mind-boggling array of biomorphs, both for close-range and long-range combat. Hefty cannons, crushing claws, toxin sacs, thorn-covered armor plates, acidic glands in their mouths, bioplasma, even organic wrecking balls. There's seemingly nothing this creature can't be armed with, should the Hive need it. Though huge and versatile, they are far from rare and have been spotted as part of almost every Tyranid force since they were first recorded in battle. Many of them also possess a powerful regenerative ability that allows them to survive truly horrific wounds and has been known to bring seemingly dead Carnifexes back to life. The Carnifex is built for a very singular purpose, to be the blunt instrument of its hive, and there's almost nothing that can stand up to even a single creature, let alone a brood of them. Taking its cue from tyrants, Trigons are basically just enormous raveners. Their serpentine bodies and highly adapted senses allowing them to tunnel for great distances and pop up seemingly out of nowhere to surprise their prey. Larger even than most Carnifexes, the Trigon makes use of its huge armor plates to generate a static charge, which it can use as a pulse of energy, arcing through nearby enemies as the creature emerges from underground. Obviously, a creature so huge could never operate as a flanking force in the same way as a Ravener could, but the Trigon serves a much more important purpose to the swarm: transportation. The tunnels created by these huge boring worms are large enough for swarms of smaller creatures to use, and so a Trigon attack usually precedes a larger attack from the swarm, often from behind fortifications or areas that have been deemed safe before a Trigon busted through the ground. Just like with the Ravener, there doesn't appear to be many mutations of the Trigon, and it's likely for the same reasons. The Trigon is just incredibly specialized, and so there's not much more the Hive could do to improve on its design, but that doesn't mean mutations don't exist. Molochs, for instance, are totally blind versions of Trigons that have adapted gigantic, powerful jaws and powerful gullets, allowing it to simply swallow any problem dangerous enough to stop a normal Trigon. Alternatively, a Trigon Prime adapts the normal Trigon creature with spines to allow for more control in directing its bioelectric bursts, and a stronger connection to the hive mind to allow the Trigon to be used as a synapse creature, which is useful considering it often leads a small swarm on its own. Technically, the Harpy is a flying Trigon, its snake-like body being supported by immense wings and spore mines coating its body to be released as it glides and swoops over enemy formations. The Harpy also improves on the Trigon design by growing a pair of arms capable of supporting larger weapon biomorphs like anti-infantry Stranglethorn cannons or anti-armor heavy venom cannons, and of course, scything talons for raking close-range passes. Similarly, Harpies have been seen mutating into Hive Crones, which are seemingly more adapted to air-to-air combat, preying on fighters and aerial transports using living missiles called tentaclids, before turning their enormous drool cannons on ground targets to soften them up in a similar manner to bombing runs made by more conventional aircraft. Harpies and Hive Crones are often escorted by massive swarms of gargoyles and shrikes, forming terrifying clouds of airborne Tyranids that completely bypass most forms of static defense. Sometimes the swarm faces an enemy that is so remarkable or unkillable that a Lictor or a Tyrant is completely unable to handle the threat. Enemies like Space Marine Primarchs, Greater Demons, or an Eldari Phoenix Lord could very well spell the end of a Tyranid army, and in those instances, a Norn Queen will pool its considerable knowledge and killer instincts into the perfect assassin. The Norn Emissary is born. Though similar in form to a Tyrant, the Norn Emissary is even larger and has absolutely no interest in guiding a swarm to victory. Instead, an Emissary will be equipped with the biomorphs and specific knowledge it needs to complete the single-minded purpose of stalking the battlefield for one of these legendary enemy commanders and ending them. Able to compress themselves into almost impossibly small areas in the pursuit of their targets, a Norn Emissary will not stop until their target is destroyed or they are killed, an act that is much easier said than done. Even the godlike warriors of the Adeptus Custodes don't stand much of a chance against an Emissary one-on-one. In addition to the usual talons, claws, and spines that close-range Tyranid bioforms tend to use, the Norn Emissary is a powerful psyker, though its abilities are almost always centered around causing as much damage to the target as possible, rather than looking to its own defense the way a Zoanthrope does. This is likely why sometimes an emissary will be created without any psychic abilities at all. This variant is called a Norn assimilator, and it trades the extra functionality that an emissary possesses for extra combat tools like tox injector, harpoons, and flesh hooks to ensnare their targets. Once a Norn emissary or assimilator is created, there's very little that can be done to stop it. Maliceptors are one of the more curious creatures spotted among a Tyranid swarm. Large and heavily armored like a Carnifex, the Maliceptor is nonetheless a huge, powerful psychic manipulator, often spotted accompanying broods of Zoanthropes and Neurothropes into battle. Completely blind, these creatures use their connection to other creatures in the swarm over the synaptic link to navigate, which might seem a little clumsy, but the Maliceptor appears to react almost supernaturally fast to new threats, using its scything talons and psychic might to absolutely annihilate the problem. In a lot of ways, the Maliceptor feels like the missing link between Neurothrope and Neurotyrant bioforms, or maybe an evolutionary dead end for the Hive. It happens sometimes, although in this particular case, it seems like the Maliceptor fills a niche where a Neurotyrant could be unavailable, but similar control over the shadow in the warp is needed. The Exocrine is not a complex creature by any stretch of the imagination. It's basically just a scaled up Biovore with a much bigger cannon. About the size of a Carnifex, the Exocrine's limbs are specifically designed to stabilize the massive body and allow for the best aim it possibly can for the bioplasmic cannon, which has its own brain. The creatures act in a symbiotic relationship, a lot like the Biovore and its fiery cannon biomorph does. Once the Exocrine hunkers down into a firing stance, its cannon delivers a powerful long-ranged ball of burning plasma or a volley of smaller plasma streams. Very similar in purpose to the Venomthrope, the Toxicrine's whole job is to spread the spores that help break down a planet's biosphere for digestion by the Hive. These spores feed on moisture, latching onto any source and using it to grow and spread. In this way, even methods of filtering out airborne toxins aren't enough to stop the damage caused by this encroaching cloud of spores, but that's hardly the only weapon a Toxicrine has. Unlike the Venomthropes that often accompany them, Toxicrines are large and relatively well armored, with tentacles and claws capable of making short work of most threats. They aren't often spotted at the very front of a battle, but they're anything but harmless. The Heris Speex is not so much a battle creature so much as it is a one-monster cleanup crew. This Carnifex-sized bioform is deployed towards the end of a battle for the sole purpose of consuming every scrap of matter it can, unhinging its body-sized jaws and unleashing a swarm of tentacles that grab everything in range before pulling it back into the creature's stomach. On the off chance there are still threats present while the Heris Speex is working, it will simply use its tentacles and claws to subdue any uppity morsels before simply swallowing it whole. It doesn't spend much time worrying about larger threats either. A similar type of creature is the Psychophage, a large armored body supporting a mass of tentacles and organic chimneys that spout corrosive ash, but that's about where the similarities end. Psychophage are specifically bred to hunt down and consume enemy psychers, digesting them quickly and shooting out clouds of psychocorrosive ash, which burns and chokes enemies on the physical and mental levels. One of the largest creatures on this list, the Tyranofex is the swarm's version of a super heavy tank or knight class walker. These huge beasts are made for the express purpose of using extremely oversized weaponry to obliterate anything standing in the way of a Hive army's progress, and it does this fairly well. Its main feature is a Titan-sized ranged weapon biomorph attached to its torso, but it also includes several smaller anti-infantry weapons to ward off close assaults, but these aren't very good at holding off focused assaults. To make up for this, the Tyranofex can release a stress pheromone that summons all nearby Tyranids to help defend it. This enormous creature also houses a breeding chamber in its thorax that comes into play much more often in the mutated variant called the Trigon. This creature is used like a Hive fleet guard, staying awake during long stretches of travel through space. In response to threats, the Trigon uses its birthing chamber to push out large numbers of fully grown termagants, which it directs using its synapse connections just like warrior broods do. Sometimes a Hive will deploy Tervigons on a battlefield as well, using them in a similar way to the transport tanks of other races, delivering fresh hordes of termagants directly to the front while mauling anything that comes close with its huge scything talons. There is some risk to this, however, as the Trigon is a synapse creature, and so if it's killed while engaging enemies directly, the backlash on the synaptic network usually kills all the Gaunts nearby. Okay, here it is, the big exception, the Hierophant Biotitan. Yes, we are absolutely breaking our own rules here, but come on people, it's the Biotitan. The monster is one of the only Titan-class creatures ever to grace the Tyranid roster, and the Forge World model is one of the most iconic and truly classic pieces from the Venerable catalog. In terms of lore, broods of Hierophants are typically deployed at the forefront of any large-scale Tyranid assault, using their tank-sized biocannons to shoot acid-filled maggots at whatever is standing in their way, quickly melting them into a pool of unidentifiable goop. And of course, these massive Tyranids have bladed claws, needle-sharp teeth, and emit toxic spores as they scuttle across the battlefield with their swarms. Each Hierophant stands about 15 meters tall, comparable to an Imperial Warhound Scout Titan, and as they act in broods just like their smaller cousins, they can very often prove a match for even larger Titans. So yes, while we cheated a bit with this entry, we're pretty sure you'll all agree that no list of Tyranid bioforms would be complete without the Hierophant. So, did you survive the swarm? It was quite a large list of creatures, probably more than any other army has to offer. Tyranids are one of the most thematically consistent armies in 40k, and they've been this way since the very beginning. With those goofy pewter models sporting their questionable spikes and guns, they're one of the best bad guys in the setting, and offer a huge range of creatures to flex creative paint schemes and kit bashes on. But even with this list, we still didn't cover everything we could have. There are unique bioforms, weapon types, and individual hive fleets we could discuss in more detail. So tell us what you'd like us to see in the comments, and while you're there, drop us a like to keep the algorithm beast from losing interest, and of course, hit that subscribe button to make sure you never run out of the best protection against the Xenos threat, more lore.